Deuteronomy 32 says, God Most High gave to Yahweh as an inheritance the tribe of Jacob, who became Israel. And Yahweh was accepted by the Israelites as their national God. Moses was also given a plan from Yahweh to invade Canaan and take the land. Moses was well aware it would be by violence and the sword. And the Sashu, wandering nomads in the southern Levant, used Yahweh in the same way before the Israelites were assigned to him. Moses learned of Yahweh from the Sashu. The Sashu tribes included the Midianites. We also learn from Egyptian records that the Sashu, meaning God's dwelling place, is attributed to several sites scattered throughout the wilderness of South Canaan. Biblical evidence of this can be found in the book of Exodus, where a key role is played by Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, who lives near the mountain of God. It is Jethro who indirectly leads Moses to his first meeting with Yahweh at the burning bush. And it is he who inaugurates the tent of meetings with a sacrifice and proclaims that Yahweh is greater than all the other gods for having freed the Hebrew slaves from Egypt. Jethro expresses to his proud joy that the God he and his people already worshipped, Yahweh, has proved himself mightier than all the other gods. Thus, rather than Jethro's conversion to Yahwehism, the passage actually shows the first incorporation of the Israelite leaders into the worship of Yahweh, Jethro's God.
So like a curious traveler on a quest, we embark upon a journey of information. Stay with us for a ride into knowledge.
El was the head god of the Canaanite pantheon, just like Zeus was in the ancient Greek pantheon. El was father and high god to all the national gods. There is evidence that El and Yahweh were worshipped in the Canaan at the same time. Just like El and Baal, Yahweh's status increased as the Israelites became more powerful in the Levant area. Eventually, for the Israelites at least, Yahweh absorbed some of the qualities of El, and the Jews alleged their God was the only one. This process is called syncretism, and has been observed by anthropologists and historians with other religions as well. Yahweh does actually mean, I will be what I will be. When the Jews were dispersed from the Levant by the Romans, non-Jews continued to live there, just as they had before the Jews arrived. They continued to worship El, Asherah, and Baal. I believe Jesus Christ's purpose was to reform the Jewish religion and reorient it from Yahweh, the war God, to El, the God of creation, compassion, kindness, and love. And the Father Jesus spoke of was loving and benevolent, quite unlike Yahweh. Yahweh is a God of war, and that is what Jesus knew, and why his adversaries crucified him.
Yeah, unfortunately. The Jews believe in a single deity who they say created the heavens and the earth. They also say there's only one God, and because they say it and wrote it down, we Christians and Muslims believe it too, or so it seems. The Bible does tell us that this God has a name. It seems to us he must have needed one to be distinguished from the other gods. But speaking of saying his name, there's a Jewish prohibition on speaking God's personal name. This came because the Jews say its correct pronunciation has been lost, and they say they fear mispronouncing it, so they don't say it. However, the Hebrew Bible does indeed spell it out with added 4 consonants. So the existence of a proper name for their God is the first indication of the history of Yahweh and his worship by the Jews. It's truly a lot more complicated than most ever realized. Modern biblical scholarship and archaeological discoveries in and around Israel show that the ancient Israelites did not always believe in a single universal God. In fact, monotheism is a relatively recent concept. Some might ask, when exactly did the Jewish holy text reach its final form? Well, that's unknown. However, many scholars believe this happened sometime during or just after the Babylonian exile, which began after one of the falls of Jerusalem, 587 BCE, some 2,600 years ago. However, the redactors of the Bible were evidently working from much older traditions, and we don't believe that biblical texts were intended to be a direct historical source in the first place. They were intended to be a story of the foundation of Judaism. They reflect the ideologies of their authors, and of course the historical context of the time in which they were written. The first clue that these ancient people worshiped gods other than the deity known as Yahweh lies in their name itself, Israel. Israel does include and invokes the name of a protective deity. That would be the Canaanite father god, El. So going by the name, the main god of the ancient peoples was not Yahweh, but El, the chief deity of the Canaanite pantheon who was worshipped throughout the Levant. In other words, the name Israel is probably older than the veneration of Yahweh by this now combined group of Judaites and Israelites. The Bible seems to address this early worship of El in Exodus 6:3, when God tells Moses that he appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but was not known to them by the name Yahweh. So how did this group of Canaanite El worshippers meet the cult of Yahweh? Judges 5:4 says that Yahweh went forth from Seir and marched out from the field of Edom. Support for the theory that Yahweh originated in the deserts of Israel and Arabia can be found in Egyptian text from the late 2nd millennium, which lists different tribes of nomads collectively called Sashu that populated the vast desert region. How exactly the Shasu merged with the Israelites or introduced them to the cult of Yahweh is not known, but by the early centuries of this first millennium, he was clearly being worshipped in both the southern kingdom of Judah and the northern neighbor of the kingdom of Israel. There was also the northern kingdom worship of a female deity, Asherah, and there was certainly the worship of the storm god Baal, along with his father El. Many scholars agree that Yahweh became the main god of the Jews only after the destruction of the kingdom of Israel by the Assyrians, around 720 BC. Who we know that after the fall of Samaria, the population of Jerusalem increased as much as 15-fold, likely due to the influx of refugees from the north. The transformation from polytheism to worshiping a single god was carved in stone, literally. But while Yahweh had by the dawn of the 6th century become their national god, he was still believed to be just one of many celestial beings, each protecting his own people and territory. This is reflected by the many biblical texts telling the Israelites not to follow any other gods. But the destruction and the subsequent exile to Babylon by the Judite elites inevitably cast doubts on the faith that they had put in Yahweh. The ones that weren't exiled became known as the Sumerians. The question was, to the ones taken, how can we explain what happened? The idea that they agreed upon and accepted was that the destruction happened because the kings did not obey the law of Yahweh. It was scary, yet quite a clever idea. The Israelites and Judites took over the classical idea of the divine wrath that can provoke a national disaster. They combined it with the idea that Yahweh in his wrath made the Babylonians destroy Judah and Jerusalem. See, that Yahweh is so strong and powerful, he made it happen to them, and they didn't want to be on his bad side. The concept that Yahweh had pulled the Babylonian strings, causing them to punish the Israelites, led to the belief that he was not just the God of one people, but a universal deity who exercises power over all creation. This is also how the Jews became the chosen people. The biblical editors had to explain why Israelites had a privileged relationship with Yahweh, even though he was no longer a national deity, but the one true God of all nations. So, after the centuries, as the Bible was redacted, the narrative was redefined and strengthened. This created a basis for universal source for three main religions. A source that could and would continue to exist for a very long time. Ultimately, all the other major monotheistic religions of today were established based on this Jewish narrative. Islam and Judaism are almost identical in their theology, except that Judaism doesn't have a clearly articulated hell or heaven concept, but their prophets are different, being Muhammad versus Moses. Although Christianity came out of a splinter group of Jews, it is quite different than both Judaism or Islam. Both Islam and Judaism do not view Christianity as truly monotheistic, and the idea that Jesus died for all of humanity's sins is quite alien to both Islam and Judaism. We worship the Father of Jesus, and they don't. We're different, aren't you proud? Well then, drop all that Old Testament nonsense about that alien bully then.
Just more food for thought.
Thanks for watching this and all our videos. Please like, share, and subscribe. And until we meet again, stay curious, fellow travelers. and have a great day.